So this is where we left off last time. We have looked over the UI of Houdini, and now let's focus on the next area, which is the node editor. Let's maybe say that to make this scene look a bit nicer, we want to add a bevel to our box right here. So what I may try to do here is to do the same thing that we did before. I could hit tab in here and maybe search for bevel. And as we can see right here, I won't find anything. The reason that I won't find anything here is that this is not the right area for us to apply a bevel. To get to the right area, I have to double click on this box node. So let's double click on here, and a bunch of stuff changed all at once. First of all, our AHTYA here is ghosted. Then our node here appears a slight bit different. Also, our parameters up here are changed. And if I, for example, jump into my handles tool, this looks different as well. So what happened here? Essentially, we jumped into our box 1 node where our actual box mesh is located. Now, if you're coming from Blender, you're used to a very similar workflow. In Blender, we have the object mode where we can build our scene and add cameras and lights. And we have the edit mode where we actually added the mesh of each object. And this is pretty much the same thing here. We have on the top level, and I can jump back to the top level by hitting this OBJ icon up here. On the top level, we are simply creating and arranging objects. And then here, one level deeper, we are actually changing the mesh of each object. And also I can navigate through the different levels as I've shown before by either double clicking on a node or using this area up here, which looks somewhat like a file explorer in Windows and acts pretty much in the same way. So I can jump to a specific level in the structure up here. I can simply use those arrows to jump in and out. Now inside our box 1 node, with our box node right here, let's now search for bevel. And now indeed we have a polybevel node. So again, let's hit enter, let's click to bring it into a scene, and let's maybe move it under a box node. And let's maybe also adjust a view in the node editor by hitting the middle mouse button. Right now, our polybevel node is complaining, and it's complaining because we have to draw a connection between a box node and a bevel node. And we have 2 inputs in here, and we have this red little arrow right here telling us that we should connect our box node to this input right here. Now we're still not seeing anything happening here, and that's for a couple of reasons. First of all being, we have to specify a bevel distance. So let's make sure that we have a bevel node selected with this yellow outline. And now let's go into the parameters, and under offsetting, under distance, let's maybe add a value of 0.1. Now stuff looks a little bit different, but we're still not seeing anything. And the reason that we're still not seeing any beveling appearing is that we have to set this blue flag right here down to a bevel node, just by either clicking on this area here or hovering over a node and clicking on this button right here. And now a bevel is starting to appear. Now these colored areas at the sides of our nodes are called flags in Houdini, and they have a few different options. The first option and the most important option is of course the display flag, because this in the end is controlling which node in here is the output node, the node that shows its result in the free view. Flag right next to it, the pink flag, this is the ghost flag. And I can, for example, turn this on for my box node, and in here I have a light gray wireframe view of this node right here, which is great for comparing the outputs of different nodes. Also, right on the very left, we have the bypass flag, and with this I can turn off a node or mute a node. So for example, if I mute my bevel node, I don't have any bevels anymore. And if I mute my box node up here, we don't have any geometry. Then right next to our yellow bypass flag, we have this red lock flag where I can freeze the geometry for each node so that I can not make any changes up here or upstream anymore. This is a workflow that for now I want you to ignore, because we're going to look at better workflows for the same result in the future. And it's something that's still here for legacy reasons, but not really recommended anymore. And then the last flag or button in here is this info button right here, and this will pop up a window with some general information for our geometry, which will be useful later in this course, but for now we won't worry too much about this. So with my polybevel node selected and with my display flag down here, I can maybe start tweaking some other parameters in here. So for example, I may want to up the divisions on my bevel node to get the shading looking a bit nicer. And of course I can keep adding nodes down here. So maybe for example, for now, let's drop down also a color node to give our box a nice color. Again, let's not forget to set our display flag down here so we can actually see anything. And then up here, let's maybe choose a nice blue that matches our rubber toy. For now, let's jump back out to our main scene. And of course, we could also jump inside the rubber toy right here and change stuff here. But what I mainly want to show right here are the different contexts of Houdini. So what are contexts? Right now, our little symbol up here says OBJ, and this is the OBJ context of Houdini. This is the area of Houdini where we want to work with geometry, polygons, volumes, cameras, lights, etc. But this is only one of many contexts, and we can get an overview by clicking on this OBJ level right here. And we get this little pop-up menu with all the different contexts that we can choose. So going through one by one, we're starting off with the channel context, which is sometimes still used for procedural animation, but in general, it's a very old part of Houdini and won't be something that we cover in this course. The same goes for the image area, which is also a pretty old compositor inside Houdini, which we don't need. Then we're getting into the more interesting nodes. We have the matte context, which we use later for building materials for our renderer. Then we have the OBJ context, where we'll spend most of our time. Then we have the out context, where our render settings will live later. Then we have the shop context, which is again a very old version of the material context and it's just here for legacy reasons. So this won't be something that we cover in this course. And we have the stage context, which is a different workflow to building materials and scenes and rendering, which we'll take a look at through this course. And then we have the tasks context, which is used to further automate stuff in Houdini. We have an entire course on our Patreon about this context, but for now, for this course, we'll ignore it for the most part. The main reason I want to show you this right now is because if you're clicking around inside the user interface, you may land somewhere that throws you inside a different context. For example, I can click up here on this motion FX view, and this will throw me inside the channels context because this is where I want to lay down nodes to change stuff in here. But of course, this can be very intimidating for beginners because now all our nodes are gone. To get back to our nodes, well, first of all, we could go back to a scene view, and then we want to jump back to our OBJ context, and again here are our nodes. We're pretty much done here with our nodes. There's just a couple of small things that I want to show you. So for this, let's jump back into our box node tree. And first of all, at some point we may want to disconnect nodes. So let's, for example, try to disconnect our color node. And one way to disconnect is just to simply shake a node free of this node tree. And of course, now we have to put our display flag back to a polybevel to see some geometry. But for example, to cut this connection, we could also hit Y on a keyboard to turn a cursor into a little pair of scissors and just cut this. Or we can also just simply select this connection line and hit delete on a keyboard to get rid of this connection as well. Also, we may want to arrange nodes in space, and what you may already notice is that we get snaps when we move nodes, but what we can also do is hit and hold A on our keyboard, A for arrange, and then for example hover over a box node and then just simply left click and drag down to arrange all those nodes into a neat little line. And this, for example, also works on selections. So if I only want to arrange these two nodes right here, I can do just that. Also, if I want to make my node tree a little more neat, I can leave sticky nodes in my node tree by hitting this yellow button up here and entering some text in here. And I can also select some objects here in my node tree and hit this gray button up here to pack this all into a network box, which I can also give a name and also collapse down if I don't want to see it. And finally, what I may also want to do is to color my nodes. So for this, I can bring up a palette up here and I can, for example, select my color node down here and color it in a nice teal color. And also I can click on this button right next to it to bring up the shapes menu and maybe change the shape of this node to something that's a bit more noticeable. And you can of course think about different systems in Houdini to make your node trees a little more readable. So these are the basics of the node editor inside Houdini, and in the next video we'll take a look at the parameter window up here.